Hello, my name's Randy Furry. Today I am interviewing Dr. S. Kendrick Eshelman, a descendant of the Furries through the Philip line. He will tell us more of that. And we are in his home that has been in the family for about 300 years. And so Dr. S. Kendrick Eshelman is going to talk to us, unable to join us, so I thought it would be best to have him videotaped. Dr. Eshelman.
Thank you, Randy, and how do you do to the three descendants? It's my pleasure to be able to speak with you. I've always enjoyed talking to the group and found them interested, and hopefully you will feel that way in listening to me today. Randy had suggested to me that I might talk about the London Vale Mills property, which began really on the Furry Tract of 1712. And I still live at the London Vale Mills property. In fact, if you go to the community picnic on Saturday, you just about a quarter of a mile up the road, you will see the big mill and house. Unfortunately, I will be unable to greet people and show them inside today because of having another meeting that's in my house. But you're welcome to come and look at it and walk around. First, for this site, was an Indian settlement. They were a Shawnee tribe nearby, more or less in the area of the current community park, on which you are part of. They probably settled down along the Peckway Creek, which you can see in the distance. In 1710, William Penn, the proprietor of the colony, as you know, designated 10,000 acres of his colony for the Hansher Mennonite settlement, 2,000 acres of which was to go to the Marie Furry and her family. It was put in the names of her oldest son, Daniel Furry, and son-in-law, Isaac Lefevre, in September 1712. 383 acres approximately of this grant was given to Isaac and Catherine Lefevre, about 1/6 of the total, because as you will recall, Mary Furry had 6 children, so each one got approximately 1/6. The section that Isaac and Catherine got sort of went down the middle. Route 30 would sort of go along it today. And then it, of course, went on either side, which is why it included the land that I'm on, over to the Peckway Creek about. But the Furry Tract went on north of there for other members of the family. Out of this 383 acres, a tract, probably 19 acres, was granted and confirmed to Samuel Lefevre, son of Isaac and Catherine, a daughter of Mary Furry. This transaction took place April the 6th, 1748, and was probably the mill tract, and actually that acreage is about the same as it is today. Now you must understand, in my giving you these figures, they may not be exactly accurate on resurveying, but they give you a reasonably good idea of the amount of land that we're talking about. I obtained a lot of this information from a copy of the deed from Isaac Lefevre's estate to my great-great-great-grandfather. Samuel Lefever's estate included three tracts of land. The mill tract that I've just mentioned, sort of in the middle. An adjoining tract on the south, originally owned by Solomon Feree, son of John, and his wife Rebecca. That was 17.5 acres, confirmed to Samuel Lefever on 12/29/1763. And then there was a tract across the Pequaway Creek in Laycock Township, consisting of 92 acres, conveyed to Samuel Lefever from the Colonel Joel Feree and his wife on August 17, 1752. You will recall that Joel Feree was the gunmaker during the Revolutionary War and made guns for the Continental Army, and I think he served in the militia locally, and that's why they called him Colonel. It may well have been a conferred title, or it may not have, but it does list him as Colonel in the deeds, so that's why I'm listing him as such. Now, the first two tracts I mentioned, the mill tract and the one from Solomon Feree that he evidently sold to Lefever, were in what they called Strasburg Township. And that's what it was then. But that part of the township was later removed from Strasburg Township and named Paradise Township, which continues. So the deed says they were in Strasburg Township, but today deeds say they were in Paradise Township. They didn't move. What moved was the name of the township. Well, now Samuel Lefever died on May 4th, 1789. It's remarkable to me how many events in our country took place 1789, if you will look it up. Well, other countries too. The French Revolution began then. Well, his estate, Samuel Lefever, was sold on the 1st of December of 1789. He had directed that this be done in his will. Back then, that often was the case. They would direct that the estates be sold if they had a number of children, so the money could be divided equally, rather than having a squabble between them as to who got the best piece of land. Now, I don't know if that's why he did it this way, but it's a good bet. So he had co-executors, William Webb and Thomas Evans. There was an Evans who was an early colonial governor of Pennsylvania, and I've not been able to find if this is the same one. It's undoubtedly the same family because he originated around here. Well, the co-executors were to put the land up for sale to the highest bidder, who was Jacob Eshelman, my third great-grandfather, lived 1742 to 1813. And Jacob probably brought it for his son, Jacob III we call him, who lived here for 62 years with a large family. He married Mary Brackbill in March 1791. The 128.5 acres sold at this estate sale to Jacob Eshelman was described in the deed as, in quotes, several, unquote, tracts of land that I've just mentioned to you, together with a grist mill, merchant, and sawmill for 18 pounds, 1 shilling per acre. At that time, the English system of currency was used. The total he paid was 2,319 pounds, 8 shilling, and 6 pence. I don't know quite how that translates into dollars, but roughly a pound might be our dollar. So a little more than $18 per acre is what he sold it for, 128 acres. That included the house, the mill, and the contents of the house and the mill. We do have a list of inventory of the house, and in that way we were able to decide what items were probably here then that are still here, of which there are a few. The land boundaries were described in the deed as follows: beginning at a wild cherry tree by land of Benjamin Brackbill, the father of Mary Brackbill, and William Reynolds, the grandfather of General John Fulton Reynolds of Civil War fame, and his brother Admiral William Reynolds. That I have added. To a post, to a plum tree, to a white oak, to a post across the Pequay Creek by land of Daniel Beshore, to a stone by the land of Matthew McClung, a Scot, Revolutionary War veteran, and John Dindlinger, respectively. To a stone to the place of the beginning, containing 128.5 acres. There were directions, of course, between each of these items, compass directions, as well as number of perches between them that would help in finding them. I don't think today we would try to find the land according to those directions. We find modern surveying to be a bit more helpful. There were also directions given to William Reynolds next door for the proper care of the dam and waterway and mill race, and for, in quotes, watering the meadow, unquotes. Evidently back then they would divert water onto the meadow to water it down when it was needed. So he wanted to be sure that none of this would interfere with the proper functioning of the mill. Then at the end of this deed, there was a signature of witnesses, a signing of the people involved, and the payment of the amount of money I've just mentioned. It was not, this recall was in 1789. It was not recorded at the courthouse, though, in Lancaster until February 25th, 1908, by A.B. Myers, recorder. Evidently back then, a lot of land transactions simply were not recorded. Or if they were recorded many years later, either by relatives or the recorder at the courthouse. So that makes it difficult to trace some of these early ones, but fortunately this one was recorded. I will say that the deed is not easy to interpret, but I think the above information that I've given you is reasonably accurate as to figures. Some additional information of interest regarding this property. Samuel Lefevre wrote a letter to the county court asking to have a road constructed to his, in quotes, new mill, unquotes, dated February 2, 1748. I have actually seen, I can't recall if it was the original letter or a copy of it, at the courthouse. The road was laid out, we think, that year, and now it is called London Vale Road. We do not know if this mill was entirely new, as Samuel said, new mill, or if it was updated from an earlier one that Isaac Lefevre constructed, who may have lived here with his family before Samuel and Catherine occupied it. No one, to my knowledge, has been able to determine it for sure where Isaac and Catherine lived. Some people thought it was here, and there's some reason to think that's true. If it was updated from an earlier mill, I think we're dealing with the same site. The mill was undoubtedly expanded in later years by my direct ancestor, Jacob Eshelman, who lived 1768 to 1851. he purchased French burr, B-U-R-R, named after a man, I think, millstones for grinding grain, imported from France to replace the local ones that were quarried not far away. The rock in the French ones is of a flint variety and quite hard and did not come off in the grinding in the flour. The local rocks were softer and came off particles in the flour for grinding, which was not too good for your teeth if you had any. So he had, either he or his father at another mill, but I believe it was this one, the first French burr millstones in the county. They're quite heavy, they weigh 1,000 pounds apiece, and I have 4 of them in there. One would be on top of the other in the grinding process. They are not put together at the moment, they're simply kept. I sometimes refer to them as Huguenot millstones, since they came from the area that many of the Huguenots did. Because they were so much heavier, there had to be a higher amount of water to turn them than had previously come from the stream to the west of the house. And so Jacob had a new mill race dug in 1818 to 1819. It originated on his father-in-law's property south of his own tract. It's still there, water's in it, but it no longer goes through the mill. And at the moment it's a little dry if you go by it, because a good bit of it is diverted to the other stream up at the original site of the bifurcation. It is plausible that flour that was ground in this mill was sent to George Washington's troops in the Revolutionary War, perhaps to Valley Forge. We don't have any actual record of that, written record that I've been able to find, but here we have Samuel Lefebvre, who I have found was a member of the Committee of Safety. They were charged with getting equipment and food for the troops. So here is Samuel with the responsibility of finding food, grinding it here under his own direction. So isn't it possible that flour was sent to the Continental troops? I'm sorry, we don't have the evidence written. Evidence, to me, indicates that the Farees, in this area at least, did favor the Patriot cause in the Revolutionary War. So the present-day London Vale property, with the house and mill, surrounding fields, became free, family-owned and occupied in 1712, and is currently owned and occupied by a descendant of Mary Faree, myself, through the Phillip line, with only 2 intervals otherwise. There have been only 2 family names associated with this property in over 300 years, those 2 being the Faree-Lefebvre family as 1 and the Eshelman family as 2. People often ask, why is this property called London Vale? Well, it was probably named by Jacob Eshelman III, my great-great-grandfather, based on the vale, which is, of course, valley, of the London land, and later called just London Run, which provided the water that was diverted into the mill, and it drained what were called the London lands to the east of the Faree tract. A group of London businessmen obtained this land and sold it off for income. They were land speculators and had about 1,000 acres of land to the east of the Faree tract. So that was called the London lands. many of the local settlers purchased land from them. To my knowledge, relatively few of the Farees did, although I think some did, but they didn't really have to. They had enough with the original arrangement. However, this London Land Run is still called that down to where it joins Eshelman Run, and so now they call it Eshelman Run all the way down to the current property. But that's apparently how it got named London Vale, basically the valley of the London Run. Pequay is from an Indian name of the Shawnee Indians, and there are a number of other names in the area from that group, such as Octorara and some others. So that gives you some idea of the history of this property. I'm sure it's not alone in that. So many of the early Faree properties do have a very interesting history. But this one has remained in the family, and we maintain it principally now as a historic structure. I couldn't grind a grain of flour in the mill if I wanted to. It isn't used for that purpose. And people say, well, why don't we make it this, that, or the other, or make a restaurant or a bed and breakfast? Well, we don't want to do that. We're just maintaining it as a historic structure. The home, however, people ask if it has electricity and running water, being so old, and we say, oh yes, that was added along the way. So you do have to update your living quarters, but it's really quite comfortable. So I would invite you in, but I'm unable to do that this time. Come back next year or 2 years from now. But you are, as I said earlier, welcome to come down and walk around and look at the outside. If you have questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them for you. Also, I want to give a slight history of the painting that you may be able to see above my head. Randy will focus on that, and I can tell you a little bit about it. Thank you for your attention.
Oops. Okay. Go ahead. I have a picture in.
All right. On the wall behind me is a portrait of Leah Faree, Mrs. Adam Leitner, at the age of 81. It was painted by Jacob Eichholz in 1838, commissioned by her son, Nathaniel Leitner, for which he paid $30. Jacob Eichholz, for those of you who are familiar with local art, will recognize the name as a prominent artist of that period and was generally recognized as such. There are many of his paintings currently in the Lancaster County Historical Society if you wish to see more of them. Leah is the great-granddaughter of Mary Faree, a daughter of Joel Faree and Mary Copeland, born August 18, 1757, died May 8, 1841, at the age of 84. She, as I have said, was 81 years old when this was painted. It is said to be the earliest portrait of a Faree descendant that is known. She's buried in the Carpenter Cemetery, which many of you have visited, near Paradise. She is my third great-grandmother, the the grandmother of Jane Juliet Whitmer Eshelman. She was my great-grandmother. Her father and mother, as I've mentioned, were Joel and Mary Marie, the gunmaker of that period. This painting that you see is now in the library at my home at London Vale. It was given to my father by Louis Leitner, a descendant, a direct descendant of Leah, who is now deceased. We value it considerably, and I could say more about it. She and her husband lived in a large 2.5-story brick home between Paradise and Sautersburg along present-day Route 30, just down the road a little bit from where we are, or where you are now at the Fulton Steamboat Inn. Philip Faree was her grandfather, and that is her line of descent. So thank you very much, Randy. I'm glad I was able to be a participant in your program, and wish you all well.
Well, I might have a couple questions for you.
Yes.
Let me get refocused here. Okay. So Ken, what is the future of London Vale? What are the plans to continue to keep the property in the family?
Well, I have a daughter, a son-in-law, and a granddaughter, all of whom are interested in the property. And I can tell just from their own attitude and helpfulness that they're interested. Naturally, it's too early for them to commit themselves as to what they might do. I doubt if I could have committed myself at their point in life. You just don't know what you're going to do until the time comes. But I do know they're interested, and hopefully will continue. It will leave the Eshelman name because I have no male descendants, just female. But that's all right. We genealogists know how to handle that. So time will tell.
Time will tell.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about, I know up on Route 30, the old home with the barn across from the township building was your grandfather's or great-grandfather's, am I mistaken? And the other property, the school's on, and you know, how that came about.
That Victorian-style home next to the school?
Yes.
You mean across from the township building? That was built probably around 1874 by my grandfather, Silas Kendrick Eshelman, #1. I'm the third. He was born and raised here at London Vale and built his home there, where he and his wife, Emma Harriet Slaymaker, lived and raised their family, consisting of my father and his sister. It has been in the family ever since 1870s. Of course, the land was all part of this original Faree tract, which is how it got to my grandfather, because he had the same Faree ancestry that I do. And so the land was originally part of the Faree tract, the Isaac and Catherine Lefevre tract. And they built that big home there. And as I said, it stayed in the family ever since, but it became rental property, and residential rental property is not easy if you don't want to give it a good bit of time or hire a property manager, and sometimes that's as much a problem as not having it, but that's just my aside. It depends, obviously. Some do a very good job. So we finally sold it in in 2009, I used some discretion in who I permitted to really look at it seriously. And I wanted it to go to somebody that appreciated historical homes and would take care of it. And we found just exactly the right couple, the woman's hobby is collecting Victorian furniture, and she needed a house to put it in.
Oh, that's great.
And her husband does a lot of carpentry work, so it just worked out fine. And they fixed it up and plan to continue. They have a big family, so who knows. But I didn't want it just to become neglected, so to speak, and who knows, when you sell it, it's no longer yours and you have no control over it. But these people, I think, will do a very good job. They live in Strasbourg now, so they're part of the community, really. Thank you for asking about that, though. It is an interesting edifice. The barn, of course, is sort of, I think they call it neo-Gothic or Gothic revival or something like that, and built post and beam construction. When you look at the inside, it's very interesting the way it's put together. They just use it now for equipment in the garage and a shop and things of that nature. And any other thoughts?
Yeah, I've been watching over the years coming through Route 30 because my family's in York and I live in outside Philadelphia. The improvements that they made, not to the house, to the barn, to the properties, it's really something else.
Oh, they've taken a real interest in it.
Mm-hmm.
And
now, what has some of the other land that would have been in the tract that Samuel had amassed is now used for other things?
Well, yes, part of it. You see, when my great-grandfather died, who had inherited the whole thing, because his wife was the free descendant who came down through Samuel and so on, Lefevre. He divided this up into the mill property went to my grandfather, the farm property next door went to a brother, Elam, who maintained it as a farm. It has, however, reached the end of its line in my cousin, who had no direct descendants, and it was sold to an Amish family, the Fishers, who now run it as a dairy farm. The next farm over had the same thing happen to it. It was another brother of my grandfather, Milton, and when he too just had daughters and no prospect for farming, and it was subsequently sold, and my cousins last owned it, and they reached the end of their road. It too was sold, and they have maintained it. The Amish have maintained the next farm nicely, and the farm to the east of it on Queen Road has also been very nicely maintained, which pleases us to see all these sections. Mm-hmm. So that what was the original Foree tract here, the land of Samuel Lefevre, has been subdivided in different ways, but the whole area that I've talked about, from south of Route 30 to north of the creek here, was part of this Foree tract. But this mill property is the only one that remains in Foree hands, you might say.
But to a large extent, the tract is still being farmed and
yes,
not been developed.
In fact, the new school right up London Vale Road at the corner of Belmont and London Vale, which we sold to the school, actually. We knew they were looking for land for a new school. The original one, well, not original, but earlier, is the one on the highway next to my grandfather's home. And we thought that it would be nice for the community to have the school there. We didn't want to see it really developed or fall into other hands, and we never knew what to think the future. So we sold it the school, for which they were very happy. They're good neighbors. They take care of things nicely. And I have thought of somehow designing a plaque to put up in the school, giving some of this history as to the origin of their land with Mary Paris, hoping to educate some of the youngsters who probably have never heard of Mary Paris. But so far I haven't gotten this plaque developed, nor have I talked to the school about it, but I should think they might be interested. So yes, you're right. The original tract, it's either farmed, or it has the private home up on the highway, or it has the school on it, and that's the way it remains.
Very nice. I'll put you on the spot here because I don't know much about the organization or the society, but the predecessor for the descendants of Marie Curie may have been the Mary Curie Society.
Yes.
Can you provide some background?
Yes, I know a little bit about it. Not a lot, but the Mary Curie Society was a group of women, to my knowledge, and I'm not sure exactly who started it. I think Betty Denlinger might have been one of the earlier, I'm sure she was one of the earlier members, and whether she started it or not, I don't really know. My mother belonged to it for a while. However, it was comprised largely of what became, over time, older women. And the younger ones either weren't here or weren't all that involved in it or had other things to do. And gradually it just diminished in numbers of people and closed, so it no longer exists.
Do you know what their charter or their vision was?
I don't really know how formally they were organized. The idea was to, of course, perpetuate the memory of Mary Curie, but I think also maybe to take care of the Curie or Carpenter Cemetery, which I think they did for a while, but of course they cannot do that now. And so it was sort of partly a social function of keeping people together, a free connection, and also somewhat of a way of honoring Mary Curie by looking after some of the community connections, like the cemetery. Probably one of the most enduring and nicest such things was contributed by Jessie Landis. As you may know, she died at age 109 in the early 1960s, and she, to the extent of my knowledge, all on her own put up that monument in the All Saints Episcopal Cemetery, listing all of the individuals in the Carpenter Cemetery and their dates of life. And she wanted not only to preserve it, because as you well know, things fall into disrepair very easily over the years, but also to show the continuity between the two cemeteries, because many of the members of the original Episcopal Church there, which used to be up on the hill, were descendants of people buried in Carpenter Cemetery, such as myself. Leah Curie, who I just talked about, is buried over in Carpenter Cemetery. My family, however, are buried here at All Saints until you get back to that period. So that the All Saints Episcopal Cemetery is in many respects a continuation of the Carpenter Cemetery. And that monument ties them together. and hopefully will remain for forever, so to speak. When the church dissolved through dwindling of attendance, it was ultimately sold. The building's still there on Lincoln Highway and Singer Avenue, owned by another denomination. The cemetery, All Saints, was taken off as a separate entity and managed in that way. I happen to be the president of the organization, and that's why they're meeting at my house on the 21st. But that monument was, we thought, a very nice gesture on her part, and not too many people today know that Jessie Landis, who you may all know as a free descendant, married Judge Landis. She was a Whitmer by birth. So that was all I can tell you about the Mary Free Society. As I said, I think Betty Dillinger, who might well be in the audience, could probably tell you more about it, but I doubt if there's a whole lot else to say.
Okay. There's a lot of history here in the house.
Yes.
And we could take a walking tour, which would be a little awkward for me because I don't know how to work the recorder real well. But it's a beautiful property, and the mill building next door from the outside looks very good. I think I may just take the recording off of here and walk around the property a little bit and look at it from the outside.
Certainly. You might want to take a picture of the old handwritten deed here.
Ah.
Even though it wasn't written, that part was written in 1908, but at that time maybe they didn't have typewriters or things, and I don't know how that would show up on your...
Wow, this is multiple pages.
Yeah.
It's like four pages long.
Right.
My goodness.
Well, they went into a lot of detail on it.
Yeah, I see here it says Samuel Lefebvre and Jacob Eshelman, to Jacob Eshelman.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I don't know how well that will.
I don't know whether that would show. You want me to hold it, or
Well, I'll see if I can't.
You can't read it, I'm sure, from
No,
the.
it's the contrast isn't real well. But here, if at my finger, it says from Samuel Lefebvre to Jacob Eshelman. Thank you.
Surely. Now, I guess the really original one is in the courthouse. But I don't know, this might be. It says this was recorded 1908, but he had to get it from something. From 1789 to 1908, so there must be an earlier document that I guess is in the courthouse. But
that's obviously a copy. That's a copy.
This is a copy of what's in the courthouse, so whether they have anything else about it, I don't really know. Yes, well, please do look around, inside, outside. I don't have many free items to show you other than the portrait or the deed. I don't really think I do. I might add that over the years there have been a lot of very interesting people that have actually been born and raised here. I might mention one was Dr. John Kendig, K-E-N-D-I-G, from which my name Kendrick probably comes. Eshelman, he was born and raised here, became a medical doctor, and became a staunch abolitionist before the Civil War, and actually joined the Underground Railroad and was what they called a station master, and ran his medical practice and this Underground Railroad work near Strasburg, and then later moved down to Downingtown, occupied his in-laws' property, which they had died, and he continued his Underground Railroad work there and was quite active. The abolitionist movement was very unpopular in this area as well as in some others, and they had to be extremely careful. They couldn't leave records because it was illegal. And they had to be very careful who knew what they were doing. They wouldn't communicate to each other directly. If fugitives were to come that evening, they would get a note during the afternoon from wherever they were coming, simply saying, "My friend, some of my friends will be visiting with thee tonight." They were largely Quakers. He joined the Quakers. He was not Quaker to begin with. But he recognized the handwriting, and that's the way he would know whether or not fugitives were coming. So they couldn't write it directly. I have a lot of his old records, and in the medical records he would note who came, what was the matter with him, what he did, and how they paid him, some of which a good bit was barter. And there were 2 or 3 instances written with another hand, undoubtedly his wife, I don't know who else would have had access, where he didn't charge anything. And the wife wrote because he was a Negro.
Oh, interesting. He kept records.
Yeah. So that's the only record I have directly connected with the Underground Railroad, and I'm sure that's why I was indicated that way.
Okay.
And there have been others. One of Samuel's, let me think, I guess brother, Joseph, became a pretty well-known congressman in that period. I guess he would have grown up here because this is where Samuel grew up. And of course I've mentioned the grandmother of the Reynolds. And there have been a number of other people. I guess if any place is around long enough, you're going to have a lot of interesting people that have grown up in it. Interesting in more ways than one, I suspect. But it adds to the enjoyment of a place to know a little bit about who's lived here, what they were like, what they did, and that's history. We're making it every day.
And I thank you for sharing with us. We've recorded a bit of your history. We're going to most likely want to post this on our website. I may see if Heather over at Lancaster History would like a copy. So we can have you for posterity. We can share you.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank
Maybe
you.
that's one of the benefits of being filmed rather than just getting up and talking.
Yeah. Well, we're going to record those speakers too. But
Oh, very good. But I do admire your expertise with this sort of equipment, Randy. It's just not something that I've had much involvement with.
Okay. Thank you. I'll stop the recording now.